Ready to start the program, so we're just really happy to have Dorothy Huntington and her family here to present to us tonight. Just a little bit about Dorothy, just background on her. She was born in Virgin, Utah, and she pretty much grew up in Virgin. And then she moved to the big city of Hurricane in 1949, and she graduated from Hurricane High School in 1950. She married Garn Huntington in 1956. They were married for 67 years prior to his passing in 2022 from COVID. So they have 4 children: Becky, Ellen, Barbara, and the foreman, Mark. He passed away in 1995. They also have 5 beautiful grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren. And Dorothy spent most of her life working for Houston Realty, and also she's been blessed to have a lot of family history on her grandfather, David Flanigan. She was 19 years old when he passed away, so she's doing really well. And let's see, she's very excited to be able to talk about her grandfather, David Flanigan, and she's also going to share part of the presentation with her daughter Ellen, and we'll also have some musical numbers as well. So I might just also mention that one of the great-grandchildren is Brian Hinton, who's our current president. So with that, I'll just turn the time over to Dorothy.
My grandfather, David Flanigan. Dave Flanigan was born in Tokerville on June the 29th, 1872, the first of 10 children to Thomas Emmett Flanigan, age 29, and Ida Johnson, age 18. She was the second wife and married Tom at age 15. Thomas and his first wife, Melissa, were divorced a few years before he married Ida. Dave grew up in Springdale, Utah, and when he was 14 years old, he had a love affair with Zion Park, and that started when he conceived the idea of lowering lumber over the 3,000-foot cliff of Zion Park by means of a cable. And in 1888, after he had made a week-long trip to Kaibab Forest for a load of lumber, he began to work on the cable. First, he spent 2 or 3 years experimenting with pulleys and wire tension to perfect his device. The 50,000 feet of wire needed was packed up an Indian trail to the top of the 2,600-foot cliff that subsequently became known as Cable Mountain. The windlass was completed in the summer of 1901, and a sawmill was set up on the top of Cable Mountain in 1904. By the close of 1906, 200,000 feet of sawed lumber had been lowered to the canyon floor. It is reported that during 1906, there were many days when as high as 10,000 feet of lumber were run down the cable. However, in 1907, at the age of 35, he sold the tramway. From 1907 to 1927, the cable works were sold several times, and the last load of lumber to come down was used by Howard Roosh in Springdale to build his house. I don't want to spend any more time talking about the cable because I feel he has received more recognition on it than he did for other things that he worked on that had a more profound effect on his total life than did the cable. However, all the inventions he worked on throughout his life, things that encompassed his mechanical genius mind, related back to the boyhood dreams and the cable works. And I quote from his writings about the cable. He says, "When the tree fell, it plunged entirely free of the cliff into mid-air. And shortly after, limbs and branches were torn off and the trunk stripped practically clean. This was the first practical demonstration I had ever observed of the intense rigidity of the air, and I became at once very much interested in the study of aeronautics. This was some time before the Wright brothers had flown their first airplane, but I began to make demonstrations with such crude models as I could build with the means at hand. And it seems that from then on, his very life was consumed by ideas and dreams that were too far ahead of his time." Now, I'm sure your ancestor did all wonderful and outstanding things, as did my grandfather. However, he had enough forethought that he made copies of many of the letters he wrote, and he saved letters he received from others. I have 6 or 7 file boxes like this one here that are full of documents and letters to and from D.A. Flanigan. So what I have to say here today is all documented. Dave was a stammerer. I quote from his mother's diary, "I thought I would like you to know that Dave is not as bad as some seem to think. It seems that when he was young, the people in Springdale did not think this rowdy boy of 14 was the one that should fulfill the prophecy that Brigham Young had made, that people would live to see lumber come down this canyon by the hundreds of feet." Again quoting, "You know, when he was a boy, he stuttered so bad he could not talk, so to be understood hardly at all. He never had any schooling to speak of. What he knows, he learned for himself. He did not go to school. The children would all mock him. As he got older, he was reading about a stammering school back in Michigan, and he thought he would go after he was married. In 1902, when his daughter Thelma was a baby, he sold a lucerne patch and took the money to go to Michigan. He was not cured at first, but eventually cured himself of stuttering. And in 1910, he wrote to the Lewis Institute for Stammerers and thanked them for what he had learned while attending their school. Now, at this time in his life, he had just sold the cable works, and he already had 6 children born to him, of which only 4 were still living. His mind was full of ideas that he wanted to pursue, but he was already receiving rejections. On August 1908, he received a letter from the laboratory of Thomas A. Edison stating that Mr. Edison was not interested in aerial navigation. However, on June the 8th, 1910, he applied for and received a patent for what he called his airship. And by February 1911, he was selling stock in his company of Utah Aerial Navigation and Power Company. I quote from a newspaper article. "Utah may have solved air problems. It is not only possible but highly probable that a Utah has solved the aviation speed problem. Laymen believe that D.A. Flanigan of Springdale, Washington County, has solved for aviators the problem of speed in the invention of what is termed the bumblebee flyer. Flanigan has devised a twin screw or propeller similar to that used on the Wright biplane, except that it works on a solid shaft within another hollow shaft. One fan or propeller is placed directly behind the other screw and revolves in an opposite direction to the one in front. With a single horsepower motor, One of the crude miniature screws gives a pressure of 3 pounds. With both of the propellers in operation at the same time, a pressure of 15 pounds is obtained. This is an increased efficiency of 500%. And Flanigan argues that with his device, an aeroplane that now has a speed of 90 miles an hour could be given a speed of 300 miles an hour. This rate of speed, he thinks, would be ample for aviators for a long time. Flanigan gave his invention the name of Bumblebee Flyer from the noise it makes. The propeller gains its efficiency, he claims, from the fact that it produces sound waves. Flanigan has his invention protected by patents in the large countries of the world. Believing that he has solved the speed, associates who have formed the Utah Aero Navigation and Power Company may seek to interest Glenn H. Curtis, inventor of the Curtis biplane and hydroplane, and chief of the Curtis Birdland in the device. Mr. Curtis believes that the aeroplane will not be found practical for carrying a great number of passengers or a large quantity of freight, but that its most important use will be covering great distances in short lengths of time. And Flanigan and his associates believe that the Bumblebee Flyer, when perfected, will satisfy the speed mania. Again, on April 1911, another article appeared in the Billboard which reads, D.A. Flanigan of Salt Lake City has invented a double-fan airship with which he will make exhibition flights in the near future. His model involves a new principle in flying which he says will revolutionize air travel. 2 sets of fans are used on this model, which are wheels running in the opposite direction. One set of fans is used to create a current blowing against the posterior blades greatly, increasing the resistance of the atmosphere. These fans can be tilted at almost any angle after the machine ascends to the height at which the flight is to be made. The effect of the first fan is practically the same as a high wind blowing against a kite. The inventor estimates that the lifting power of these fans will be many times the propelling power of present devices. A company that has been incorporated. Flanigan and his associates will not set any time when they will have a real airplane ready, but they say they have a working model which will fly far enough to demonstrate the practical of their method. Although Dave was still trying to perfect his airship, he had other things going on at the same time. In May of 1911, he applied for a patent on a windmill. On October 1912, he received his patent. Following is a letter of testimony about his windmill. Testimony of windmills by D.A. Morris. I, the undersigned, hereby testify that I have one of David Flanigan's windmills. In my judgment, it is far ahead of any other windmill for the following reasons. Because of the double fan wheels, which gives it many times more power over the one wheel mill. Because of the simplicity of the mill. And best of all is the automatic working of the rudder, which shuts the mill off when the wind blows hard, and when the wind ceases, the rudder comes back to place and the mill goes to work again. After using this mill for 3 months, I know that the above-mentioned facts are true, and will also state that 2 men weighing at least 170 pounds each tried to stop this mill while it was running, and could not, as the mill would lift them off their feet. This mill is mounted on a hay pole, which costs not over $5 or $6. This and all the tower that is needed is all the tower that is needed for this style of mill. This mill is arranged with only 4 fans to each wheel, which is about 7 feet in diameter. Now the windmill and the airship were not the only things he was working on at this time. He was working to perfect a 4-wheel drive automobile. On April the 3rd, 1913, he wrote to his mother saying, "You will be surprised to hear that I am on my way back to Utah. I left Cincinnati yesterday and arrived in Chicago at 9:20 this morning. I have the patterns all made and the details all marked out, so thought I would go back to Utah, then either come and get the car or have it shipped to Salt Lake City. I don't know just when I will be home or whether or not I will go for a while. Write to me at the White House Hotel in Salt Lake City." Dave did spend a lot of time traveling in the East trying to promote his inventions. He worked for years with the Ideal Machine and Tool Company in Cincinnati, Ohio, perfecting the four-wheel drive. By 1913, Dave and his wife had born 11 children, and 2 more were born later. So he didn't spend all of his time traveling. When asked where the Flanagans lived, everyone said, "Over the river." So without practice or without permission, I'm inviting my siblings to come up and we will sing "Down by the Riverside." After which, my daughter Ellen will continue and finish the tribute to D.A. Flanigan.
We haven't tuned in together, so we don't know what's in the.
These guys went to the family Christmas party. Daddy looks a lot like Santa. So Derek looks that way. On the uke.
We're not into.
I met my little bride down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I met my little bride down by the riverside, down by the riverside. She said, "Have patience, little man, I'm sure you'll understand. I hardly know your name." I said, "If I could have my way, maybe some sweet day, your name and mine will be the same." Well, when my little bride down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, I met my little bride down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the
All right, now
I get to read the rest of it. I don't have much as information as my mother. Well, I have all the information, but I don't know anything. But, so, first off, I should have my sister be reading this. It's a poem that she wrote when she was 15 years old. Sorry. The Strike of David. The year was 1892. In the hamlet of Tocqueville, a boy was born to Ida and Tom in a hut nestled under the hill. The year was 1881. The weather was getting cold. The hardship of family life grew, and the boy, he had to leave school. Dave's biggest event was in 93. 'Twas the most important, no doubt. To the St. George Temple, he took his wife. Her name was Clorinda Melvina Stout. To Springfield in 1894, he moved a pregnant wife. Melvina was born but died the next day. This was just the beginning of strife. Alberta was next in the year 95, then Myrtle in 97. Sorry. Alberta, she lived a long, happy life, but soon Myrtle was called to heaven. The year 98, Uncle Alma was born. 2 years later came Don. Aunt Thelma was next in 1902. These three people live on. Hosea and Orville and Beatrice were next in 1904, 5 and 7. Orville, he stayed to live a long life, but Hosea and Bee are in heaven. Then Nora in 1908 did arrive. Without her, I wouldn't be here. For my grandmother, she happened to be. Believe me, she was a dear. Vernon was born in 1911, but in the very prime of his life, a very bad accident took him away, so David's life continued its strife. In 1914, little Iris was born. A beautiful child was she, but 5 years was all that she was allowed. Now she lives in eternity. Zayla was last in 1918. To age 35 she did live. She was the talented one of the bunch, and while alive she did give. Now David and Clary lived a full life, but she died in 1939. He continued to strive on in life till he was 79. Many accomplished belong to their life, other than children, I'm sure, but without our children to brighten their life, the other things could not endure. As I read my mom's words and stuff here, she says, I want to state here that David's wife and family did not have an easy life. He was gone most of the time, and she was left to take care of the farm. They were fruit growers, and in the summertime, they dried tons of fruit. In a letter to Dave, dated February of 1925, Leo Snow writes, I have agreed with several of the merchants here in St. George to sell some of your dried peaches. At first, they were not very anxious that they could get all they wanted from Santa Clara. But yours look much better than the Santa Clara peaches. And as a result, will demand a little higher price. While they talk 10 cents a pound, we will give you 12.5 cents if you will ship them your best peaches. I am quite sure that from 200 to 400 pounds could be marketed today if they were ready for delivery. That's a lot of peaches. In the meantime, Dave is devoting most of his time by trying to sell stock and develop his companies for the airship, car, and the windmill. However, he met with obstacles every way he turned. In the windmill company, they had lots of prospective buyers, but they just couldn't get the money together to build enough windmills to put them on the market. On the four-wheel drive auto, he was having another problem. It seemed that the Ideal Tool Company had charged him too much for the work they had done, and it turns out that the bookkeeper for the company had a nervous breakdown, and therefore the paperwork on the car had not been done correctly. However, Dave did finally get his patent, and the car was completed and driven to Utah. It was believed that an A.M. Booth, a photographer, bought the car and used it extensively. We've also been told that Dave eventually sold his patent for the four-wheel drive for $15,000 to help him further develop the airship. At the same time in which he was working on the three main inventions, he also built one of the first water wheels ever used to lift water from the Virgin River to the farmlands above its banks. Most water wheels use the weight of the water coming from the top to turn the wheel. Flanigan's water wheel used the current of the river to turn the wheel from the bottom and lift water approximately 50 feet to the top and onto the canal. Now I want to tell you a little more about the development of the airship, by which it is not being called an airship anymore. He is now calling it a helicopter, and the problem Dave ran into along the way. In March of 1917, he received a letter from the United States Senate. They were answering his letter he had written to the Secretary of the Navy, asking for the assistance of the Navy Department in developing the helicopter machine. This is my personal favorite letter. Their answer was, in regards to Mr. Flanigan's invention of the helicopter flying machine, with request that the department assist in developing this machine, it has been found by careful study that the helicopter machine is not suitable for use in the Navy. And it is not advisable to spend government funds for this type of development machine. So, the Navy didn't like helicopters. However, on May of 1923, he applied for his patent on the helicopter and received it on July of 24. And they are now selling stock, not on the Aerial Navigation and Power Company, but as in 1911, but it was now the Multiple Rotor Company, as Dave was using the same mechanical transmission in the car, windmill, and helicopter. Again in 1925, still trying to obtain assistance, Dave received a letter from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, signed by Heber J. Grant, saying they were not at liberty to use money to buy stock in his inventions. In August of 27, Dave received a letter from F.B. Anderson trying to set up appointments with Lindbergh, but this never materialized. In a letter dated January 19, 1928 to Senator William H. King in Washington, D.C., Dave asked for assistance in getting his information to someone in the atomic research work who would give it some earnest consideration. In January of 28, there was also correspondence between Dave and the University of Wisconsin trying to get some backing, and a letter from Dave's uncle Alex trying to get him an appointment with Henry Ford. In February of 1930, there is much correspondence between Dave and the Los Angeles Examiner trying to get backing and advertising. Also a letter to and from A.W. Ivins from the Church of the University of Utah. In August of 31, letters to and from Captain R.L. Long in Manila Fields in the Philippines. On January 1933, a letter to Albert Einstein. In August of 1933, letters to and from the General of the Air Corps, General O. Westover. He also had letters to the editor of the Desert News and to and from the governor of Utah, George H. Dean, and the National Committee for Aeronautics. In September of 35, letters to and from Richard R. Lyman, and in 1936, corresponded with Governor of Utah, Herbert B. Monk. By now, Dave was discouraged and was a broken man, physically and mentally exhausted. In August of 1945, Dave was admitted to the Utah State Mental Hospital in Provo. He spent 30 days there, then returned home to Virgin, and even then he had not given up on trying to continue on with the development of his helicopter. He got Mr. King and Mr. Higbee from Hurricane to do some machine work for him. In September of 47, he again was admitted to the Utah State Hospital. I believe that if it were today, there would be satisfactory treatment for him in the confused state that he was in without going to the mental hospital. But in those days, that's the way it was. The harsh treatment he received there and the many, many documents he wrote, well, there is another whole story that I won't go into today. However, I will say that I have read many of the things he wrote, including things he wrote on a roll of paper towels, which is the roll of paper towels that are right there, that I have in my possession, and used the heel of his shoe for an eraser because they would not give him paper to write on. I also have a pamphlet he had published at this time on the conditions in the Utah State Medical Hospital titled, observation and experimental versus theory, or the iron ring. And I believe that he certainly should not have been in the mental hospital. However, that is where he died on November 1st, 1951. In closing, I said I didn't want to talk much about David's experience with Cable Mountain. I end with a quote from a paper he wrote in 1926, which was about 20 years after he sold the cable. I believe it sums up in his own words the feelings and frustration he felt, because he was certainly a man ahead of his time. D.A. Flanigan, saying goodbye to the wire. As I held onto the wire for the last time this Christmas Eve in the year 1906 and looked down to where it passed over the pulley far out on this floor of Zion Canyon, which is now shaded and full of gloom, I might have said, although some men seem to hate you, I have learned to love you. I love you for what you are, but I love you still more for what you have done for me. After having been misused and abused in a measure which it seemed might have caused you disruption, yet you have gone on for years to years with quiet dignity and have justified the great faith I had placed in you and more. My father and his family have lost financially, which I regret. However, material things offer nothing which is worth of the great ambition manifested by a local few to achieve this success, which is its own reward, for it brings a joy known only to those who fight for truth and win. You have led me through one of the most interesting and instructive chapters of the book of nature. You have taught me the value of patience, accuracy, and precision, and the reward that comes to one who is willing to take pains. I've seen in my dreams some flaws or disarrangements in your construction, which I have learned to regard promptly and carefully. And why should I not love you? For you are the dream of my boyish enthusiasm come true, and you seem to have been a part of my very beginning. You have been the means of my giving and receiving love, hate, and friendship with all kinds of people, and have helped me to acquire a sense of humanity, itself the most complex thing man ever studied. In the fight which you have helped me to make against intolerance, you have taught me to be tolerant. You have developed in me a feeling of contempt for theology, as made or constructed by men. But you have awakened in me a feeling of reverence for the divine power and infinity, before which I have learned to bow in silent worship. Although I know you are but a material thing, yet it has almost seemed that you had a soul, and that you had received some divine touch that rendered you and those who were near to you immune from 1,000 accidents that might have happened but did not. You have made me think of the words of Ingersoll when he said, "The books filled with the facts of nature are our sacred scriptures, and the force that is in every atom and in every star and everything that lives and grows is the only possible God." I might have said this and more. I might have written a book, but did not. I only said goodbye, goodbye forever, and turned away, for I was overcome with emotion which in 20 years I had not been able to forget or express. D.A. Flanigan. Okay, so Mom has a whole bunch of stuff that's up here that she wants everybody to come up and take a look at it. There's the paper towel that I talked about, and there's the scroll is, she copied them and did that, and then she has another paper that she actually translated it. There's just a ton of stuff up here, so just come on up and look at it. So,
All right, this brings us to our close, and we are once again very, very thankful for the Dorothy Huntington and David Flanigan family for coming and presenting to us tonight. Very educational, and if we all had the ingenuity and wherewithal that David Flanigan had, boy, it would be a different place, wouldn't it be? Give him one big round of applause again. We then thank those who helped set up tonight. Appreciate the help very much. We're going to go ahead and take down the tables, but I believe we're going to leave most of the chairs out in the center. Some of the family members want to sit around and have a little family reunion, get together tonight. So We can roll the big round tables after we get done up on the stage. We may have to take them through and around the backside and come up the stage. So we'd asked Nancy Hinton if she will give us a benediction for the night.
Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful for this evening to meet as the sons of the Pioneer chapter here in Hurricane Valley. We're so grateful, Father in heaven, for Aunt Dorothy and for Ellen and for the brothers and sisters, the Bradshaws, and also for David Flanigan and Dixie Gifford, and for their great grandfather. And we're grateful that the David Allen Flanigan family was able to bless this valley with lumber to be brought down for Zion and for us here in Hurricane and Laverne and all over. We're so grateful for our pioneer heritage and for all of the other people that are here tonight and their ancestors that helped with this valley. We're grateful for the camaraderie of this group, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.